what I'd like to do first of all is to introduce the author, who is J D Sharpe. But that's not really her name, it has to be said.
It's like I'm a spy, I have many names.
Yes, she is Jasmine. She is Jasmine Richards. She is an editor of fine fiction at Oxford University Press. And by day and by night, she dons a cloak and she is an author of some renown. This is her debut novel published in the UK, and but this is her first novel in the UK, and it is a novel for teens, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because it's a bit gory.
Mm-hmm.
It is about it is the story of Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, and it is twisted.
That's right.
The
clue's in the title.
The clue is in the title. So, a first question is, why did you decide to mess with the words of the greatest Charles Dickens and turn that into a different sort of story?
Okay. So what I have to say first of all is I have no idea if Charles Dickens was still alive. If he was still alive, he'd be very, very old. Whether he'd approve of what I've done, I have no idea. I'm a huge fan of his. The reason why I decided to write Oliver Twisted, it actually, about 4 years ago, I was near Regent's Park. I'd just left Waterstones and I'd seen these two guys talking about Pride and Prejudice. And they were talking about it, they were really excited about the storyline. I was kind of looking at them, they were maybe like about 18 years old, and rightly or wrongly I kind of thought, I don't know, I didn't expect you to be so excited about Pride and Prejudice. And then I started to listen a little bit more carefully, and I realised they were talking about a book called Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And so I went away from there kind of thinking about it, thinking about how you had these two guys talking about Jane Austen's work and how excited they were. And they were engaging with the storyline. Sure, there were zombies in it, but they were now aware of the story of Darcy and Elizabeth. So I was kind of walking through Regent's Park and I was thinking, I'd love to do something like that for teenagers. So as John says, I'm an editor, so I'm always kind of thinking about books that are being published and books for young people and what might interest them. So it was first as an editor I was thinking, oh, it'd be great to do a book that kind of took a well-known story and kind of twisted it. But how many period books are there where the protagonist is a child? So I started thinking through that. And then very quickly I got to Oliver Twist. And then very quickly I got to Oliver Twisted. And about the third step along, I was like, oh, who can I get to write this book? I was like, oh, hang on, I could write this. I was like, oh, yeah, actually I'm not giving that idea to anyone else, so I'm going to have a go and write it. And I hadn't ever written any horror before. I've always been a big fan of it, but I'd never written any. So that evening I went home, I started to read Oliver Twist again, and I decided, actually, I thought when you start reading Oliver Twist, you realise there's a lot of darkness in there already. It doesn't take much at all to push it on, and that's how I had the idea.
So how did you go about changing it? Did you keep the structure as it was and maybe start with the first line as it was written and then start to change it like Pride and Prejudice did?
Yeah.
Or did you retell the story of Oliver Twist in your own way with your own structure?
So what happened at first is I kind of I plotted out the main turning points in the original Oliver Twist. And then I started to sort of write around that, and I had Dickens's version open next to me because what I wanted to do was also introduce modern day readers to some of his language and some of his words. And sometimes, especially with his descriptions of London, I couldn't do a better job than Charles Dickens. I just can't do it. So I would take a line of his description of London and put it into the Word document that I was working on. But very quickly, I began to realise that actually Oliver Twist is a massive novel, and the way Charles Dickens wrote it was week by week. He never got a chance to go back and edit it. He was kind of committed to what he'd written the week before, and there was a huge appetite for Oliver Twist. So actually there's a sort of natural break in the story where you think it's all concludes, and then he introduces a new plot device of this character called Monks, who is Oliver's half-brother and is really evil and dastardly. And I had to make a about whether I was going to have monks in my story or not. Because for me, whenever I read Oliver Twist, it always felt like, I'm not saying Dickens got it wrong, but there was like a neat story there, and then he had to introduce this new plot device that never really worked for me. So at that point I decided actually I was going to do away with monks. And once I made that decision, it kind of opened up the whole story for me, and I kind of went off-piste, which is really exciting. So I had that kind of crutch and security to begin with, but then I kind of deviated kind of massively from the storyline.
What do you think in it specifically makes it a teenage book?
In the original Oliver Twist, Oliver is quite passive, so he isn't really in control of his own destiny. He's more, it's his existence is what is changing other people's lives, and you're never really in his head. You don't ever really get to know what Oliver's thinking in Dickens's Oliver Twist. So for my version, I really wanted to have a character who got angry, who got upset, who got scared, and you could actually see his thinking process. So I think that's one thing about kind of empowering a child in a book. In the previous version, he didn't have the ability to make choices, and so in this book, he does. The other thing I say specifically makes it teen is there is a high level of gore. I didn't just want it to be about gore, I wanted it to be genuinely scary and moving as well, but if you're going to call the book Oliver Twisted, I think you've got to deliver on that, and I hope I do. So there are definitely some gory points, and that makes it more appropriate for teenagers.
Okay. For any budding authors out there, perhaps in this room,
yes.
Doing something like what you have done with Oliver Twist might be a good exercise in creative writing.
So the short answer to that is yes.
Yes. Can you give us the long answer as well?
I'll give you the long answer as well. So I think where lots of writers start, actually, the first place they start is with fairy tales. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why you see so many reimagining of fairy tales and legends and myths in fiction. It's because those stories are so well known. There's something really comforting about taking something that's really familiar and deciding to put your own stamp on it. So even as a budding writer yourself, taking the story of Cinderella and saying, you know what, I'm going to put this in space, and that's been done. A book called Cinderella is actually a cyborg. And that book is really successful. The author has taken the idea of Cinderella and decided to turn her into a cyborg. And it tends to happen with authors' debut novels, because I think they're still trying to find their feet, find their voice, so they fall back on these really familiar stories. So I think fairy tales in particular are a great place to start if you're interested in writing. Taking one and thinking, how could I change it? How could I twist it? What characters could I introduce? What characters could I remove? How could I change the setting? And see what you come up with.
Have you got a bit that you might be able to read out?
Yes.
Which might represent, give us a flavour.
Days passed, and Oliver finally came to a deserted village on the outskirts of London. Everywhere he looked, he could see large painted boards fixed to the walls, but Mrs. Mag had never been bothered enough to teach any of the orphans to read, so he had no idea what they said. He tried to beg for some bread at a farmer's house, but he was told to move away from the door before they set the dogs on him. That evening, Oliver picked lice out of his hair and swallowed them whole, tears of disgust seeping from his eyes as he felt the tickle of legs at the back of his throat. When the night came, he turned into a field, and creeping close under a cone-shaped hayrick, settled down to sleep. He was awoken by the wind that moaned dismally over the empty fields, a low, persistent moan that would not stop. The cold had seeped deep into Oliver's bones, and made him shiver so vigorously he thought his teeth might shatter. The gale's moan was even fiercer now, and so loud that he felt like the wind was right on top of him. His house of hay began to rock backwards and forwards, stalks of hay falling in a spiky shower. Fear scraped along Oliver's spine, for beneath the moan of the wind he could hear grunts of exertion. This was no wind. Someone was trying to lift the hayrick off of him. Oliver clenched his fists. "I'm not going back," he screamed over and over again. "I'm not going back." The moaning stopped for a moment, and then so did the grunts. All that could be heard was the creak of the hay cone as it slowly toppled to one side and crashed to the ground. A cloudless sky allowed the full moon to illuminate him, and Oliver felt like a snail that had been ripped out of his shell. He got shakily to his feet, ready to face his pursuer, protest hot in his mouth, but the words disintegrated on Oliver's tongue, because it was not a member of the Brotherhood who stared at him with the promise of death in his yellow eyes. It was not Mr. Sowerberry's face that was riddled with gaping holes where maggots frothed. It was not Mr. Bumble, who stank of decay and was so stick-thin that his skin hung like rags from his body. Flesh, groaned the creature in front of him. Woe-begotten, Oliver whispered back.
Thank you very much.
After the event at Waterstones, J D Sharpe took the time to give us a quick interview.
If you could go back in time and talk to your pre-published self, what would you say? What advice would you give? Run for the hills, or there is some piece of advice that you wish you'd known? Or?
That's a really good question. What would I say? I kind of wish I'd done more kind of website stuff earlier. So, or maybe had started a blog or something, so that you actually have a platform there ready when the book. So people who are kind of interested in your writing, interested in you, and actually you have in the book to say, look, this is the result of my endeavour. I think that might have been quite a useful thing to do. What else? Just to remember to take time to enjoy it. I mean, I've done some amazing things this year, because it's been Dickens Bicentenary as well, so I got to go to Buckingham Palace. It was just awesome. And Tim Burton was there. I pitched my book to him, and he was really lovely about it. He listened to my whole 2-second pitch, and he was like, you know what, that sounds really interesting. But you know, we're doing Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. It's kind of got this niche field, but you should get in touch with Hammer Films. Like, honestly, such a lovely man. And so many things were happening that week. It's almost like I didn't get time to enjoy each of the individual things. So I would say make sure you take the time to enjoy it, because it is, you only get to be a debut author once. Yeah.
So I guess the weirdest thing you've either done or looked up in the name of research.
Weird in terms of research. It's not actually for this book though. So there's another book that I've written called Book of Wonders. There's a scene where my main character is running along the ramparts of this building. It's really high up. So I was in Morocco and we were on the ramparts, and I wanted to see what it felt like to actually jump from rampart to rampart. But I got up there and I froze because I was terrified. It was really high up. So then I had to climb back down. And I got my boyfriend to go up, and I got him to jump from rampart to rampart. And obviously the sea is right there, and we were up really high. I was like, how does it feel? Describe the wind rushing through your hair. Are you scared? How does the rock feel beneath your feet? And he's like jumping from rampart to rampart, and I'm like writing things down. So that was pretty weird. Yeah. And also I was just too chicken to actually do it myself. So yeah.
Other people are for.
Yeah, exactly. Minions. Yeah. Minions are good. Yeah. The festival awesome. I came last year as well. It's fantastic that there's a festival just dedicated to children's fiction. There's a lot of talent out there, and it's nice to have it all in the same place. So.